28th May 2023 is a very important date for all IAS aspirants as the UPSC is all set to conduct the preliminary examination. It is on this date that your years of aspiration, months of hard work will be put to test. I'm sure most of you would be worried about your current affairs revision and practice. But you need not worry because we at BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS, we shall be bringing back our flagship Target Prelims 2023 free crash course starting from the 24th of April. In these sessions, we shall be covering more than 900 important current affairs topics through MCQ-based discussions. These sessions will contain in-depth explanations and expert tips to help you ace the exam. As always, these sessions shall be free on our YouTube channel, and all you have to do is to subscribe to our YouTube channel. See you on the 24th of April. Hello everyone, very good morning. Welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep and welcome to our daily Hindu analysis. Before we begin, let me wish everyone a happy Civil Services Day. Today, that is the 21st of April, marks the Civil Services Day because on this day in 1947, India's first Home Minister, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, addressed the first batch of IAS probationers and he referred to the Indian bureaucracy as the steel frame of India. So here's wishing every civil service aspirant a happy Civil Services Day. And also don't forget, we have 3 days to go for Target Prelims 2023. So subscribe to our channel and look forward to the free crash course, which is starting from 24th April live on our YouTube channel. You can see the entire schedule over here. We'll be covering all the important current affairs of the last 1 year through MCQ-based discussions. We hope to cover around 900 topics with in-depth explanations, and these sessions will be live from 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. from 24th April to 15th May. So please make the full benefit of this free crash course so that you're thoroughly prepared for the upcoming prelims. With this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by first looking at the topics we are going to cover in today's analysis. We have 4 important articles lined up for a detailed discussion. I have chosen few important columns from page number 10, page 17 and page 12. And we shall look at the prelim section as well. We have around 5 articles that are more relevant for your prelims. So let's evaluate these articles one by one and let's also look at the entire background of these topics. We'll move beyond the article. We'll look at the background information as well so that we can comprehensively cover these topics and we don't leave anything behind so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper. So all you have to do in return is to support us so that it's a motivation, it's an encouragement for us to keep doing better, right? So all you have to do is press that like button, share your comments and subscribe to our channel. So let's start with this first column on page number 10, written by Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. She was the former chief scientist at the WHO. So based on her expertise, she talks about a deadly infectious disease that is TB or the Shire Rog as it is called in India, which stands essentially for tuberculosis. In this article, the writer is talking about this deadly disease, what India and the world can do to eliminate tuberculosis. So let's examine this topic in complete detail. Let's understand the context in which the writer is talking. What's the premise? What's the viewpoint of the writer? And then I'll explain everything about tuberculosis. This topic is very, very important for your prelims, for your mains. You can even expect an essay topic on tuberculosis. The reason why this article has been brought out is because recently, around 1 month back, the One World TB Summit was hosted by India. India faces one of the highest disease burden with regard to tuberculosis. We report millions of cases every year. India has one of the highest disease burden and India is leading the global efforts to not just control tuberculosis but to eliminate tuberculosis. So last month on the 24th of March 2023, India hosted the One World TB Summit at Varanasi in Uttar Pradesh. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed this important summit and he gave a call for instilling fresh energy for the global efforts to eliminate tuberculosis. There is a global target which has been set under the UN Sustainable Development Goals to eliminate tuberculosis by 2030. Now, I want you guys to take up a small exercise here. Find out which target is this. What's the target number? Under Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, there are 17 goals identified. Under each goal, there are a list of targets. Now you figure out which goal and which specific target deals with elimination of tuberculosis by 2030. India and the world are striving to achieve this target. So Prime Minister Modi instilled fresh energy into this global effort, and he said that India will be spearheading this effort at a global level as well. The writer shares a similar viewpoint. The writer says India is in the right position to work with the rest of the world to not just tackle this threat but to eliminate this disease forever. The writer says what we need is greater innovation, more investments in research and development, and a better response and a better policy framework to counter the challenge posed by tuberculosis. This is what the writer is calling for. The writer says that innovation and research will be the central drivers of change which will help India and the world to eliminate tuberculosis. So let's understand why this topic is so important. What is so dangerous about tuberculosis? See, tuberculosis is considered as a leading killer amongst infectious diseases. It is as dangerous as your COVID-19 pandemic, or many experts believe it is a little more dangerous than even COVID-19, because it is present in almost every country in the world, and it's an infectious airborne disease. It is caused by a dangerous bacterial infection. It's caused by a bacteria called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Please remember these facts. Very, very important for your prelims. This infection primarily grows in our respiratory system, in the lungs. It primarily affects the functioning of the lungs. If the infection escalates and grows, it could lead to lesions or small tears in the tissue, in the lung tissue, and even leads to fibrosis, and eventually results in pulmonary and extrapulmonary conditions, where there is fluid accumulation in the lungs that directly affects your breathing, induces intense coughs filled with blood, and leads to many other hazardous symptoms which could even turn fatal if not treated. And if your body doesn't respond, there is every possibility that this disease could become a killer disease. It has quite a decent mortality rate, and that is what makes tuberculosis a very dangerous infectious disease. So please note, it is contagious. If a non-infected person were to be in contact with an infected person for a prolonged period of time, if you have a prolonged exposure with someone who's already infected, you might catch the disease through airborne droplets from the infected person. The only good thing is it doesn't spread very easily like COVID-19. The transmission does happen through contact, through airborne transmission as well. It is contagious, but you need to spend quite some time in close, intimate positions with the infected person, right? But once infected, the bacteria grows in the pulmonary system, in the respiratory system, and infects the lungs. And especially those with comorbid conditions are highly susceptible. Those who have HIV/AIDS, those who are suffering from diabetes, infants, and as well as aged people, people above 60 years. They are more prone, they are greater risk of catching tuberculosis, which could turn into a very serious infection and could turn fatal as well. There are different types of subtypes of the bacteria which have been identified to cause the infection. I feel this could also be important for your prelims. Almost everyone will know that Mycobacterium tuberculosis is the bacteria causing tuberculosis. But you should know the subtypes as well. There are 4 major subtypes which have been identified around the world. Please make a note of this. Mycobacterium bovis, Mycobacterium microti, Mycobacterium careti, and Mycobacterium africanum. These are the 4 major subtypes that are the leading killers around the world. Now, what are the symptoms of this disease? The symptoms includes severe intense coughing with blood, night sweats, loss of appetite. The cough can last for a very prolonged period of time with chest pain, sudden chills, especially in the evening and night times, fatigue and weakness, unexplained weight loss accompanied with fever, again during the evening or night time. These are common symptoms of tuberculosis, and again very, very important for your prelims. So fortunately, due to advances in healthcare, in diagnostics, we have been able to develop diagnostic tools through which we can easily detect a person who has been infected with tuberculosis. You have various tests which are available: blood tests, test of the sputum, which will confirm the infection. But of course, blood tests and sputum tests, they are a little more complicated, they take time. So as a result, many people, they don't get tested on time. When they start reporting these symptoms, most people dismiss the concern. They feel it's a regular flu, a regular cold flu like of conditions, and they dismiss the threat. So they don't get diagnosed at all. So many people, they're not even reported. Many infections are not even reported. There are other advanced testing methods as well, called the skin test, where a molecule is injected into the skin, and if there is an inflammation in the skin, that is a marker of tuberculosis infection. Later, I will talk more about the skin test. It is relevant for the article. We'll come to that. So there are different diagnostic tools available, but the problem is they're not as simple or as accessible as the COVID-19 test, for example. If you look at how the world responded for the COVID-19 pandemic, through research and innovation, we came out with very simple diagnostic kits where you can test yourself. You can take your throat swabs, nasal swabs, and these rapid antigen test kits were developed, and many other different platforms of diagnosis were developed where people could perform self-diagnosis. So that always plays a big role in detecting the cases at the early stage and preventing further infection. But in case of tuberculosis, even though diagnosis is available, the problem is it's like your RT-PCR test. It takes a little more time, more effort, more money. The blood and sputum tests, the skin test, and even chest x-rays. You need to visit a healthcare center to get the test done. You need to spend some money as well. So people hesitate, people hold back, and as a result, many cases, they are not even identified. So this is a major challenge in our fight against tuberculosis. When it comes to treatment, of course, we have an effective line of treatment available. It's nothing but your antibiotics. The development of antibiotics was a revolutionary step in human history. It has single-handedly saved millions and millions of lives around the world, and especially with regard to tuberculosis. There are at least two lines of defense available here. There is a first line of defense and a second line of defense. These are very strong antibiotics designed to treat such bacterial infections. I hope you know antibiotics are mainly to treat bacterial infections. They don't work against viral infections. So those who are infected are put on an intensive antibiotic course lasting several weeks, going up to 6 months, because it's a very persistent infection. The infection doesn't die out very quickly. Your immune system has to fight it out. Sometimes patients report a latent TB condition where the body doesn't remove the bacterial load entirely, but the infection becomes latent. It becomes dormant in the body. The immune system only suppresses it. The person will not be affected. They'll not transmit this to others as well. But the bacterial infection could remain within your body for several years, maybe for the lifetime. So antibiotics have to be taken as prescribed by the doctor for a prolonged course to not just fight the bacterial infection, but sometimes it has to be suppressed as well. And of course, we have a vaccination available as well to prevent the infection altogether, which is the BCG vaccine. It's known to be quite effective in preventing TB infections. But however, young children, old age people, people with comorbid conditions, they will remain at high risk. They're highly susceptible despite vaccination. So this is something you should know about tuberculosis, some basic details. Now let's go a little in depth. Let me tell you the global scenario. Let's look at the situation in India and what steps has India taken to fight tuberculosis. The WHO has branded tuberculosis as a global threat. It's a global disease. It's present in almost every country in the world. According to WHO, at least 1.8 billion people have been infected already. And as I told you, in many cases, it would be latent. where the bacterial infection would have become dormant in your body, your immune system would have suppressed it, and it of course further doesn't affect the person, or you won't transmit this to others, but it remains latent. So at least close to 1.8 to 2 billion people have already been infected, and according to WHO data, last year alone, more than 10 million people were infected. That is a very big number. And more than 1.5 million people, around 1.6 million deaths were reported. So the mortality rate is quite high. It is quite significant. Such large-scale deaths, large-scale infections will not just be a health threat anymore. It will become a socio-economic threat. It is going to disrupt the society. It's going to disrupt the economy. It's going to devastate countries and regions. That is the potential of this disease. TB is known to spread widely in rural areas where there is a lack of awareness and lack of accessible medical treatment and facilities. So in such areas, it will wreak devastation and havoc, and it's going to destroy the country, the region, and the economy will also collapse. So more than 10 million infections are reported almost every year, with more than 1.5 million deaths. This makes TB a global threat that requires immediate focus from all the countries to not just tackle the disease, but to eliminate the disease altogether. As I told you, the most vulnerable here are children, old age people, those suffering from comorbid conditions, even pregnant women. They're all highly vulnerable. All right, especially after the age of 35 to 40 years, women become very vulnerable for catching TB infections. The bigger concern here is the rise of drug-resistant TB. Drug-resistant TB has come up, which has become a global threat. Okay, let me shed more light on this. Let's understand what exactly is drug-resistant TB. This is a direct result of our abuse of antibiotics, especially in developing countries and underdeveloped countries. I'm sure most of us would have done this as well in India. The moment you fall sick, the moment you report flu-like symptoms, we run to the nearest pharmacist and purchase the drugs we want without even consulting a doctor, right? Self-medication has become a huge threat. Many people take antibiotics on their own. They pop it like candy. I'm not even kidding, right? They pop it at every sign of infection, and this leads to the abuse of antibiotics, right? This leads to a growth of resistance where the pathogen gets exposed to the drug frequently and it starts adapting, it starts mutating. As the pathogens are frequently exposed to the first line of drugs that we have, right, they will start mutating, they'll start adapting, they'll build a resistance against it. And this is exactly what has happened in the case of tuberculosis. This also happens when you interrupt the course. Let's say the doctor has said that you should take the course for 4 weeks or 6 weeks, but you break it after the symptoms subside. You don't follow up on the entire course of antibiotics. Even this exposes the pathogen. It allows the pathogen to still survive, mutate, and come up with new variants which become drug resistant. They become completely immune to the first line of drugs we have, that is the first line of antibiotics. So the abuse, the misuse, and the improper intake of antibiotics is the biggest threat over here. Many doctors prescribe antibiotics even when there is no need for it. There are many cases reported where even in case of viral infections, without any sign of bacterial infection, antibiotic treatment has been prescribed. This is a mistake with the medical system as well. So the abuse and misuse of antibiotics and the interruption in the course allows the bacteria to become resistant, to mutate, and develop complete resistance against these drugs. So this wipes out our first line of defense. The first line of antibiotics could become useless. Then you need to go for second line of antibiotics, which are much stronger with potential side effects as well. And again, the abuse of these antibiotics has led to extensive drug resistance. New variants of TB have been detected around the world, especially in developing countries like India, where bacteria has been seen to have become extensive, it has developed extensive drug resistance, and it represents the biggest threat as far as the healthcare sector is concerned. There are cases where this could lead to total drug resistance, where the bacteria becomes so immune to every antibiotic that all your drugs available for treatment, they become ineffective. So the rise of drug resistance is the biggest threat here. The rise of multi-drug resistance, extensive drug resistance, and the possibility of total drug resistance is the biggest concern that most countries have, because it's going to set us back by at least a couple of centuries. In terms of healthcare advancement, it's going to set us back by at least a couple of centuries, as most of your antibiotics could become ineffective against these harmful infectious diseases. So this is where India faces a very big challenge. As I told you, we face the biggest disease burden in the world as far as tuberculosis is concerned. According to the Global TB report, which was released by WHO, India clearly is the biggest contributor to the global TB cases. Please remember this fact. India accounts for 28% of the globally reported TB cases. The disease burden is clearly very, very high on India. Is that clear? But due to a focused intervention by the government of India in the last 15 to 20 years, we have managed to keep it under check, and we are seeing a gradual decline in the numbers that are being reported. See, the number of cases being reported might be going up on a year-to-year basis, but this is because of better testing. It's because of better diagnosis. If you look at the numbers for 2021 and 2020 and compare the two, you will see a slight increase in the number of cases being reported. But this is not a dangerous development. It's actually a positive development, because it means we are detecting more cases, we are tracking down more cases. So it does not mean that there is an exponential rise in India which is happening. That's not the case. In the last at least 10 years, we have managed to bring down the caseload. We are detecting more cases, treating them effectively. Most cases get treated quite effectively. So India has developed a dedicated portal to keep track of TB cases in real time. It's called the Nikshai portal. Kshai is the name of the disease, right? Kshai Rog is tuberculosis. It refers to end of tuberculosis, or to put an end to tuberculosis. This is an initiative started by the government of India, Nikshai initiative. Under this, there is an online portal where every TB case detected is logged in real time, thus providing for more accurate estimates around the country. India also has detected a rise in drug-resistant TB. We have seen reportage of these cases, but again, in the last few years, we have been able to keep a check on the drug-resistant TB as well. It points to better management methods from the health authorities. So let's see what specific measures, policy measures has India taken to fight tuberculosis. India has launched the National Strategic Plan to eliminate tuberculosis, which is being implemented from 2017 to 2025. Under this, we have launched the National Tuberculosis Elimination Program, and we have set a target of 2025 to eliminate tuberculosis in India. It's a very ambitious target. It is 5 years ahead of the UN Sustainable Development Goal target. Is that clear? The UN itself has set a target of 2030 under Sustainable Development Goals. India has set a more ambitious target for itself. We have set 2025 as a deadline to almost eliminate tuberculosis and to reduce the caseload, to bring down the number of cases per 1 lakh population, to reduce the mortality rate per 1 lakh population. So such specific targets have been laid out by India, and we have even launched an initiative called Nikshai Mitra Initiative. Under the Nikshai Mitra Initiative, we are roping in all the stakeholders. This initiative was launched in 2022 by the government of India. All the stakeholders, including the government agencies, the public sector hospitals, along with them private hospitals, the corporate sector, NGOs, volunteer organizations, and as well as the community, the local community. All the stakeholders are being involved under the Nikshai Mitra initiative. Under this, TB patients are being extended additional support for diagnosis, for their nutritional requirement, for their vocational support, to support their livelihoods. So this support is coming in from the private sector. Private companies are contributing as part of their corporate social responsibility. Government agencies and the public healthcare sector is leading this initiative with private hospitals and NGOs and citizen-based groups as well. Local community organizations are also playing a key role in assisting the TB patients, in ensuring that TB patients have all the support needed, support for diagnosis, livelihood support, nutritional support, and any other support in the form of their treatment. So this has been turned into a community-led initiative under the leadership of the government. For this, the Nikshay Mitra scheme or initiative has been launched, and the online portal also has been set up to keep track of all the cases in real time. So these are some major initiatives India has taken, and the writer says India has done an incredible job at keeping the cases under check. But however, there are many more steps that need to be taken in order to eliminate tuberculosis by 2025. If you have to achieve that ambitious target, there are more steps that need to be taken according to the writer. Here the writer says we have to draw lessons from how we have responded against the COVID-19 pandemic. The writer draws a clear comparison between our response to fight tuberculosis and the response against COVID-19 pandemic. Since COVID-19 was a new unknown disease, it was a novel virus, there was more fear amongst the people, the government as well, and there was a more focused response in containing the pandemic. There were more investments in research and development. There was more focus on innovation. Several biotech companies, pharma companies, healthcare institutions around the world, they dedicated millions of dollars and large manpower to ensure that we came out with effective, simple diagnostics and better lines of treatment to treat the symptoms. And also the fast and rapid development of vaccines and deployment of different types of vaccines. Right? If you look at COVID-19, multiple variants of vaccines were developed using different technologies that provides more complete coverage. And these were deployed at a record time, completing the testing phase, the trials, and for final deployment. Also, there was greater acceptance amongst the public to get themselves vaccinated. And initially, at least during the pandemic waves that were reported, people were more willing to get tested. At the initial sign of symptoms, people would be more willing to get tested because there were easier diagnostics available. Now, this is where we should try and replicate this model for tuberculosis. That's what the writer is saying. The writer is saying that National TB Elimination Program in India has seen a lot of success. It has progressed well. There's no doubt. We have contained the infections. We're tracking it well. The treatment has improved. Diagnosis has improved. But believe it or not, for every case we detect, at least 2 cases are going missing. Because people lack awareness. They don't identify these symptoms with tuberculosis. Right? They think it's a regular flu and they don't get themselves tested. Also, the diagnosis available, it's not very easy, it's not very simple. It is a little expensive. The blood tests, the chest x-rays, and even the skin test I was talking about. It's called TST test, the Mantox tuberculin skin test. In this, a chemical agent, a small sample of tuberculin is injected. It's basically a purified protein which is injected under the skin. And if the skin inflames over here, if it swells up, if there is a swelling reported here, more than 5 mm in size, then that is a clear marker of TB infection. Yes, these diagnostic tools are available, but all of them requires a proper medical facility. And you have to spend some money for this, or else you have to seek out the free diagnosis in government hospitals. Now, this is what is preventing people from getting diagnosed, from getting, getting the initial line of treatment. So this is where the writer says we have to draw lessons from how we fought the pandemic. We need to invest more in innovation and research and development, both government and private sector. We need to come out with more simpler diagnostic tools like nasal swabs and throat swabs, through which we can bring out home test kits. And this should be accurate. It should have a fairly high degree of accuracy, if not 100% accurate, right? And if people can test themselves through home test kits, that is the best way you can identify the disease in the initial stages. So this requires greater collaboration between the government and the private sector, and it requires more investments in innovation and research. That's why the writer is saying innovation and research will be the driver of our effort to eliminate this disease. Even the BCG vaccine, a lot of doubts have been expressed about its efficacy. Even though it fairly gives a level of immunity, vaccine-induced immunity to fight TB infection, it is known to be breached as well. There are many cases where young children, adolescents especially, and even adults with comorbid conditions, old age people, right? Even though they were vaccinated, they have been infected quite seriously as well, thus highlighting the gaps in the vaccine. Right now, we are relying on just one type of vaccine. But look at COVID-19. We developed multiple types of vaccines using different methods and different technologies, thus covering the full spectrum of the infection. So this is where the writer is urging for greater research, greater innovation, so that we can come up with more effective vaccines. We can have different platforms on which vaccines are built so that it is giving us more effective immunity against these infections. So this requires an enabling policy framework from the government. The government already has dedicated schemes in place. Now we need to fine-tune the policy framework to focus more on research and development. That is the overall point the writer is trying to make. All right? So this brings our first big article to an end. This completes the discussion on the column that we just saw. Now let's move on to the next couple of articles. Both are related to each other. We have an important column on page number 10, and we have a related article in the foreign news section as well. Both topics are linked with each other, so I'm going to analyze this topic together comprehensively. So this article is written by a former Indian ambassador to West Asian countries such as Saudi Arabia, Oman and UAE. He has been India's top diplomat in these countries, Talmiz Ahmed, a former IFS officer, and Stanley Johnny, the foreign correspondent of the Hindu, writes a detailed assessment article on West Asian geopolitics in the other article. All right? So this is the other article we're going to look at on page number 17. So let's club both the articles together and understand what the writers are talking about. Because in West Asia, there is a very big change that is taking place. If you guys remember, I had spoken about this just a few days back. Just a few days back, we spoke about the changing geopolitics of West Asia, how a paradigm shift is being witnessed in West Asian geopolitics. So let's examine what changes are taking place. How does it influence the region? How does it affect Indian interests and global geopolitics? Now you're looking at the map of West Asia. In the West Asia region, the region reports a lot of volatility, a lot of tensions, because there is a regional divide. And this is a result of the sectarian divide between some of the countries over here, the Arab states. There is a sectarian divide between the Shia powers and the Sunni powers. The Sunni powers led by Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar as well to an extent. All these are on one side. All these countries are allies of each other, all the Sunni powers. Then you have the Shia powers led by Iran. Iran is seen as the leader of the Shia world, which gets support in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Is that clear? Lebanon is ruled by a Shiite government. Syria is actually a Sunni majority country, but ruled by a Shiite government. The president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, he belongs to the Alawite sect, which is one of the sects of Shia Islam. So the rulers of Shia, the royal family here, which has run a dictatorial government, right? It's a Shiite government which is aligned with Iran. Iraq is a Shia majority nation, right? Which has been going through its own difficult period in the last 20 years. But all these countries are aligned with Iran. Iran is very influential across these countries which are seen as the Shia powers, whereas Saudi Arabia is the leader of the Sunni world in West Asia. Now, I'm stressing on this point because there is intense rivalry, geopolitical rivalry between the Sunni and the Shia powers. Both sides have repeatedly targeted each other. The rivalry is so intense that even India-Pakistan rivalry fades in front of the Shia-Sunni rivalry in West Asia. Both sides have waged covert wars against each other. They have sponsored terrorism against each other. They have sponsored civil wars to destabilize other countries. They have been involved in these asymmetrical wars where they are targeting each other, undermining each other constantly. So this has made West Asia very volatile. It's a destabilized region, and this has a huge economic impact as well because these countries are the major oil producing and exporting nations. So any instability here directly affects the oil markets and has a huge worldwide impact. India obviously has very big interests in this region, mainly because for our energy security, Most of our energy supplies come from this region, right? Almost 60% of our oil gas imports is sourced from West Asia. Plus, there is a very strong Indian community residing and working in almost all these countries. There's a very strong Indian diaspora. More than 10 million Indians can be found all across the West Asian countries. So these are major interests for India. Plus, we have important relations with these countries to protect. India is very close to Saudi Arabia, UAE. We have very important ties with Iran, with Oman, right? And with all the other major countries. And India has to strike a balancing act. So this has always been a challenge for us because of the regional rivalry between these powers. The Sunni powers have often got support from other regional and global powers such as Israel, US, and European countries. All these countries are more aligned with the Sunni powers led by Saudi Arabia. Even though Saudi Arabia and others have continued supporting the Palestinian issue, they have struck a silent peace with Israel on the background. UAE and Bahrain, they signed the Abraham Accords as well recently and recognized Israel as well, thus ending their rivalry with Israel formally, even though they have been having secret friendly ties for many years. So all the Sunni powers led by Saudi Arabia are largely aligned with US, European countries and as well as with Israel's interests. This is the general alignment that you see here because they share a common rivalry with Iran, which is pursuing nuclear weapons. And that's the reason why the Sunni powers, including the Western countries, have often tried to destabilize Iran's allies, such as Syria or even Lebanon. Iran retaliates by sponsoring various radical groups, extremist groups, like Hamas, which is a terror group operating in the Gaza Strip of Palestine. It targets Israel and as well as American interests. Iran also sponsors another radical extremist group called the Hezbollah, which operates in Lebanon. It's a Shiite radical group backed by Iran. Similarly, Saudi Arabia has countered Iran's covert wars by sponsoring the civil war in Syria. US and Israel have been actively involved as well in the attempt to destabilize Syria at least since 2011. They sponsored an uprising against the government of Bashar al-Assad by capitalizing on the Arab Spring movement, which was spreading across North Africa and Middle East region in 2010-2011. Arab Spring was a pro-democracy revolutionary movement against the dictators present along Middle East, that is West Asia and North Africa region. Initially, it was an organic movement which started mainly on social media like Facebook, WhatsApp, etc. In countries like Tunisia, then in Egypt, the people organized themselves. It was an organized, organic movement where they rebelled, they protested against the dictators, and they fought for democracy and they toppled the governments. But this movement was quickly hijacked by the regional and global powers. They misused the Arab Spring to target their rival countries. So this revolutionary movement was sponsored, it was extended into countries like Libya, Syria, and many other countries to destabilize these countries. For example, US and European countries, they wanted Gaddafi in Libya to be removed. They leveraged the Arab Spring movement and sponsored the rebels to destabilize Libya and push the country into a civil war. And they even carried out a military intervention to ensure that their interests are protected and Gaddafi is removed from power. Something similar was done with Syria as well. To remove Assad from power, who was a close ally of Iran, right, who was working with Iran, helping Hamas and Hezbollah, Saudi Arabia, the Sunni powers led by Saudi Arabia, along with Israel, US and European countries as well, have backed the rebels in Syria in a so-called pro-democracy movement. They have backed even extremist outfits, including outfits aligned with Al-Qaeda. In many ways, the US, Israel and Saudi Arabia became responsible for creating a fertile ground for the rise of more radical groups such as the Islamic State in Iraq-Syria border, right? So these groups have used terrorism, covert wars as an option to destabilize Iran and Iran's interests. And Iran is no less. Iran has backed a civil war in Yemen. Yemen was a close ally of Saudi Arabia and a neighbor of Saudi Arabia. But Yemen was destabilized as Iran supported the Houthi rebels and triggered a civil war in 2014. And the country has been devastated since 2014. So all across the region, you see such hostilities present. where the Sunni and Shia powers are targeting each other, and there are extra regional powers involved, global powers involved as well in backing their respective players. While US and Western countries and Israel are aligned with Sunni powers, Russia and China are not far behind. Russia and China are more aligned with Iran. They are very close to Syria as well. And China in particular is in a unique position to influence both the sides, as it is very close to both Sunni and Shia powers. Mainly through its investments. It has made massive investments all across the region, especially under its Belt and Road Initiative. And this gives China a unique leverage over Shia powers like Iran and Syria. And it has the same leverage with Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman and other major Sunni powers as well. So China is in that unique position where it can balance out these countries and bring them to the negotiating table. Russia has historically been close to Iran, Syria and these countries in the region. So both the countries have been playing a bigger role of late, and you see a decline in American influence in the West Asia region over the last few months. This led to a historic accord, which is being called as the Beijing Accord, that was signed just a few weeks back. China played the role of a mediator. It mediated between Saudi Arabia and Iran and allowed them to work out an agreement to restore diplomatic relations between the two countries. This is a landmark shift in West Asian geopolitics. Both the rivals had cut off their diplomatic ties 7 years ago. Both sides blamed each other for the civil wars in Yemen and Syria, for the terrorism in the region. Iran blamed Saudi Arabia for the civil war in Syria. Iran blamed Saudi Arabia for the rise of Islamic State. Whereas Saudi Arabia blamed Iran for the civil war in Yemen and for sponsoring Houthi rebels. This conflict and rivalry led both countries to cut off their diplomatic ties. They ended their economic relations and diplomatic relations, and they shut down their embassies and consulates as well. They had no diplomatic contact with each other, and as a result, rivalry and tensions were increasing over the last few years. But now China has suddenly stepped in. It has used its leverage with both the major Sunni and Shia powers and brought them to the negotiating table. Through this, the so-called Beijing Accord has been worked out, which has helped restore ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Now, this was unthinkable even last year. Just 4 or 5 months back, if you had asked me whether there would be a restoration of ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the answer would be no. It was seen as unthinkable. But now something unthinkable has been achieved. It's as if India-Pakistan striking a peace agreement all of a sudden. That is the scale of developments which has happened in West Asia in the last few weeks. This has opened up a new era in West Asian geopolitics. Iran and Saudi Arabia are moving forward to re-establish their diplomatic ties. They are reopening their embassies and consulates, restoring their economic and cultural relations. And more importantly, they are sending delegations to all the other countries as well, including Yemen and Syria. In the last couple of months, active efforts are being made, led by the regional powers, led by Saudi Arabia, Iran, Jordan, Oman. All these major West Asian countries are sending delegations to Yemen and Syria, even Egypt, Kuwait and Bahrain. They've all held a dialogue with the Syrian government, with Bashar al-Assad government after a very, very long time. They had actually cut off ties with Assad's government from the last 12 to 13 years. Now, proactive attempts are being reported. A Saudi-Omani delegation has visited Yemen to negotiate a settlement with the Houthi rebels. Similarly, Syrian leaders and diplomats have been visiting all the major powers in the region, and their respective foreign ministers and diplomats have been meeting with Syrian leaders as well. It's not just one country here. Even the other powers like Bahrain, Qatar, then Jordan, Kuwait, all of them are getting involved, even Oman. They're all opening up to Syria, giving recognition to Assad's government, and attempts are being made to end the civil war permanently. With regard to the Yemen civil war, according to reports, an initial agreement has already been worked out, which has been mediated by Saudi Arabia and Oman, along with the help of Iran. Reportedly, they are striking an agreement with Houthi rebels for a peaceful transfer of power to a stable government, along with exchange of prisoners and financial support and political support to rebuild Yemen. So this is great news for the region. If these conflicts come to an end, right, It will end the suffering of millions of people. Today, Yemen and Syria have been ravaged by the war where millions of refugees have been created. There are critical problems that are affecting human rights all across the region. If these conflicts are brought to an end, it will stabilize the whole region and it will boost the whole economy and as well as the stability of the region. These talks that you see which are happening recently, they're all being facilitated by China and Russia. They are leading the initiatives with the help of their West Asian partners. As I told you, Russia is very influential with Syria and Iran. It's leveraging those ties to ensure that these countries are moving towards a peace agreement with the others. China has leverage with both the sides, with both Sunni and Shia powers. That is how it is working with Saudi Arabia, Iran and all the other powers, bringing them to the negotiating table so that stability is restored in the region. This fulfills the economic and geopolitical interests of both China and Russia. But the most curious point here is that as diplomacy is replacing conflict, it's the American influence which is on the decline. It is Israeli interests which is seen to be compromised. Because this is not good news for Western countries and Israel. Their interests serve in keeping West Asia divided. All right? That is how US has protected its dominant military and economic position for decades together, by dividing West Asia on sectarian lines, by breeding extremism. And you can see the same interest for Israel in order to limit the support for the Palestinian movement from the West Asian powers and the Arab countries. Now this would be threatened. You see a decline in American role in the ongoing peace process. You see a more independent regional solution being carved out by the regional powers themselves with the mediation of China and Russia. So this is the huge dramatic shift being reported in West Asia, and this has very big implications for India as well. Now if you look at Yemen, just look at the map here. There are some important locations in Yemen, strategic locations. Please make a note of this, it's very important for your prelims. You can see the Socotra Island over here. This island belongs to Yemen and it lies at the opening of Gulf of Aden, which is a strategic shipping lane. India depends on this heavily, but these waters are infested with piracy. Somalian pirates from East Africa, from Horn of Africa, pose a very big threat in the region. Plus there is terrorism and civil war present. And this is a huge threat for shipping, and it affects India because this is a trade route for India to reach out to Europe via Gulf of Aden and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait over here. This is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is a choke point. Djibouti, which is the small country here, right? It's located right next to Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and on the other side in the Arabian Peninsula you have Yemen. So Yemen and Djibouti control the access here at Bab el-Mandeb Strait. That's why many foreign countries have a military presence here. Even US, China and many European navies, they have their naval bases in Djibouti so that they can stabilize the region and ensure that Bab el-Mandeb Strait is kept open and stable for shipping in the region. So India has very big interests as well. Near Bab el-Mandeb Strait, there is an important island of Yemen. Is that clear? Yemen has a very, very important island over here, the Perim Island. Perim is another strategic island belonging to Yemen, controlled by Yemen, along with the Socotra Island. So both the islands are strategically located in these important shipping lanes, and UAE has deployed its military forces here to stabilize the shipping lanes. UAE has a military presence. Even Saudi Arabia has a military presence across these water bodies. So India, which is working closely with some of these countries, would be interested to ensure that the Yemen civil war comes to a stable end, a peaceful end. Yemen has important ports, strategic ports like the Aden port and even the Hodeidah port. These are strategic ports of Yemen. All right. So India would also be interested to see an end to this civil war in Yemen. Because when the civil war broke out in 2014, thousands of Indians were trapped and they had to be rescued by India through Operation Rahat. Indian Navy had to conduct this evacuation mission. Our interests were compromised in Yemen and in the region. So the stabilization of the region and the end of this conflict is good news for India as well. So India would hope that a peace agreement would be worked out to stabilize Yemen. We will have similar hopes for Syria as well. Syria also has been a very good partner for India. Now this is what Stanley Johnny is talking about in his article on page number 17. He's talking about the growing acceptance of the Syrian government. There is acceptance amongst the Sunni powers that Assad has won the civil war. Despite all the rebellion that was sponsored by US, Israel and few other countries, Assad has withstood due to direct support from Russia, Iran and even China. Today the rebel groups have been almost decimated, and terror groups like Islamic State also have been almost wiped out, because both US and Russia saw Islamic State as a threat, and through the combined effort of US, Russia and all the regional powers, ISIS also has been more or less eliminated in the region. But now Assad, who has clearly established his authority, is finally getting recognition and acceptance from the other Sunni powers and the other countries in the Arab region. There are talks of bringing Syria back into the Arab League. Is that clear? This is a very big development. See, Arab League is a regional grouping of all the Arab countries. This includes countries in West Asia. It includes countries in East Africa, and as well as countries in Northern Africa and West Africa. There are 22 member countries in the Arab League. Essentially all the Arab countries, all the Muslim majority countries here, they have this grouping called the Arab League that brings together these Arab states from West Asia, East Africa, North Africa and West Africa. 22 countries are part of it. When the civil war broke out in Syria in 2011, Syria was thrown out, it was suspended from Arab League. The Sunni powers which are more influential in the Arab League, they threw out Syria, they suspended Syria's membership. But now there are talks led by Saudi Arabia, Oman, Jordan and other countries. They have all met with Syrian leaders and diplomats, and there are talks going on to bring Syria back into the Arab League. If this happens, it is likely to happen in the next 1 month. If this happens, it would be the biggest development of the region, as it would help end the civil war formally and bring peace and stability to the region. Russia has played a critical role in stabilizing Syria. It is using its influence and ties with all the countries to ensure Assad's government is recognized and Syria is brought back into the Arab League. Now I'm stressing on this point because India is an observer state to the Arab League. India holds the observer status at the Arab League. We have very important relations with all these countries. As I told you, we have big interests here. So these developments are positive developments for India. It marks a regional solution. It marks the beginning of a regional solution to this rivalry and an undermining of American influence and Israeli interests and a parallel rise of Russian and Chinese influence. This is what you're witnessing. Saudi Arabia has expressed interest to become a member of SCO and BRICS grouping. This is good news for India. The SCO is already one of the major groupings of the world, right? India is currently holding the chair of SCO, and Saudi Arabia has shown interest to join these groups led by Russia and China. Parallelly, Saudi Arabia will continue its strategic defense ties with US, European countries and also with Israel. Saudi Arabia continues to procure weapons from US. Those strategic defense relations will continue. It's trying to strike a balance between these global powers. Iran, on the other hand, is aligned with Russia and China. Now that Saudi Arabia, Iran have struck a peace, it again undermines Western interests, the interests of US, Israel and even European countries. So it would be interesting to see how they would react, but it definitely represents a positive development as far as Indian interests are concerned. Yes, India will still have to balance it out with US and the Western countries, but still, the regional solution is good news for India. Stabilization of the conflict in Yemen and Syria will bring a lot of stability to the region, and India would be looking forward to it. Iran is a key component of important connectivity projects like INSTC project. India would be looking forward to take up such initiatives and connect with Russia. The INSTC project will help India connect with Russia via Iran. So there are big developments happening, so please watch out for these new developments being reported from the West Asia region. Now coming to the fourth article from page number 12. This article is from the Defense and Internal Security section. It focuses on the squadron strength of the Indian Air Force. It's focusing on the fighter jet conundrum being faced by the Indian Air Force. So let me shed some light on this. Let's quickly analyze this article. This column is mainly focused on the depleting squadron strength of the Indian Air Force. See, the Indian Air Force has a sanctioned squadron strength of 42 fighter jet squadrons. Each squadron will contain multiple fighter jets. So in total, the Indian Air Force is supposed to have 42 fighter squadrons to be able to meet all our threats, including the threats emanating from China, Pakistan, and the other threats to our airspace. To deal with the possibility of a two-front war with China and Pakistan, where a possible simultaneous war might break out with towards our northern and eastern and western borders, and to deal with any other threat to dominate the Indian Ocean as well, the Indian Air Force requires a minimum strength, squadron strength of 42 fighter jet squadrons. This is the sanctioned approved strength. But if you see how many squadrons we are left with today, you'll be shocked. Today we are left with just 31 squadrons. This is going to deplete further by 2030. This is likely to go down to 29 to 30 squadrons by the end of this decade. It will start increasing only by 2035, where it might come back to 31 to 35 squadrons. So even after 12 years, we will still be short of the sanctioned strength of fighter squadrons for India. That is the serious challenge. This highlights the gaps in procurement, the gaps in indigenous technology, indigenous defense production, right? This is a huge challenge being faced by the Indian Air Force. And recently, it made the same submission to a parliamentary committee on defense. To the Standing Committee of the Parliament on Defense, the Indian Air Force submitted these details, highlighted the risk, the threats being faced by the Indian Air Force as we are not able to replace the old aging aircrafts. Several procurement deals have been delayed. Indigenous development has suffered for decades. And due to all these gaps and flaws, the Indian Air Force is left without enough number of fighter jets. The squadron strength has depleted to 31. It's going to drop to 29 to 30 by the end of the decade. Even after the new procurements we are going to make, it will only increase to around 31 to 35 by 2035. That's 12, 13 years down the line. So in the near term, at least for the next 2 decades, India will not have the sanctioned squadron strength for the Indian Air Force. All right. So why is the situation happening? Now, if you look at the mainstay of the Indian Air Force currently, the primary fighter jets being operated by the Indian Air Force, out of the 31 squadrons we have, right, the majority is the frontline Sukhoi 30 MKI that we have procured from Russia. It's a 4th generation advanced fighter jet, which is the backbone of the Indian Air Force currently. It's an air dominance fighter, right? Then you have few outdated fighter jets like the Jaguar, MiG-21, even Mirage 2000 and the MiG-29. All these aircrafts are being phased out. The MiG-21 is of 1960s origin. It's of Soviet origin from 1960s. MiG-29 dates back to 1980s. They're all outdated. They're no longer relevant in today's combat environment. The Jaguar, which is of British origin, right? Even though it's of great utility for the Indian Air Force because it can deliver nuclear weapons, we have to phase out the Jaguar as well as its outdated technology doesn't meet the standards needed for Indian Air Force. So all these fighter jets you see here, these squadrons will be phased out very soon. All right. So we will be losing around 15 squadrons in total in the coming 12 to 13 years. They will be phased out. So to replace them, there are few deals that Indian Air Force is pushing through. All right. But these procurement deals are not progressing as it has been planned, as it has been envisioned. So as an emergency requirement, India directly procured the Rafale fighter jet from France. All right. The Mirage 2000 is also of French origin. India had procured the Mirage 2000 from France back in 1980s. It was a frontline fighter. It even saw action during Kargil conflict, even during Balkot airstrikes. It's known for delivering precision guided bombs. But in the coming years, it will be outdated. It has to be phased out. So India has directly procured the Rafale fighter jets. Couple of squadrons have been built up and stationed both against China and Pakistan. But this again is not sufficient. And we can't always rely on foreign procurement from foreign vendors. This is where the focus shifts to the indigenous fighter jet, that is LCA, the Light Combat Aircraft, also called Tejas. The Tejas program has run into a lot of problems. The fighter jet program was launched in 1980s. It's been 40 years and yet the program has not reached a high level of deployment readiness. Today, the program is doing better after a lot of technical issues and delays. Finally, the LCA Tejas is ready for deployment and the Indian Air Force has started placing orders from HAL to procure the Tejas, which is indigenously designed and developed and it's being domestically produced. So in the future, several new variants of LCA Tejas will be procured. This would be the backbone of Indian Air Force, complementing the Sukhoi fighter jets. Along with that, India is focusing on a multi-role fighter aircraft and an advanced medium combat aircraft. These are two planned initiatives. For multi-role fighter aircraft, India will procure this from a foreign vendor. India is looking at a foreign fighter jet for this segment. Either it could be the Rafale itself or maybe the F-18s of the US. India is considering multiple options, or maybe a new advanced fighter jet of the 5th generation category. So India would be procuring this from a foreign vendor, more than 100 fighter jets. And a parallel indigenous program is being started for around 126 advanced medium combat aircraft. The Aeronautical Development Agency and HAL and National Aeronautics Limited. So the Indian public sector defense agencies, they will be spearheading a domestic indigenous initiative to develop a new fighter jet called AMCA, the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft. So the goal is to have new fighter jets, at least 500 new fighter jets in the coming years. Similarly, Indian Navy is also facing a critical shortage. Right? The Navy operates aircraft carriers like INS Vikrant, INS Vikramaditya. The long-term plan is to have few Rafales or the F-18 Super Hornet along with a new twin-engine deck-based fighter jet. So the Navy is also looking at a mix of foreign procurement and indigenous development. But none of these requirements will be met in the immediate short term. It will take many, many years for India to scale up. As I told you, by the end of the decade, despite the new fighter jet acquisitions, our squadron strength will drop to 29 to 30 or 29 to 31. By 2035, India might increase this to around 35, 36 squadrons because of all the new procurements. The cabinet has approved the deals for the new variants of LCA Tejas. The cabinet is still looking at the proposals for MRFA and AMCA deals. All right, the initial development and the design of AMCA has been approved, but the whole project is yet to be approved. And the Cabinet Committee on Security is yet to approve the MRFA deal, where we can issue a global request from foreign vendors and start evaluating them for procuring these fighter jets. So this represents a critical gap in India's defense modernization. It represents a major gap in our fighter squadron strength. That is exactly what the writer and the column is highlighting. So this requires defense reforms. It requires policy reforms in modernization and defense procurement, right? So hopefully these large-scale changes have to be done to scale up the fighter squadron strength and ensure that we hit the sanctioned strength as soon as possible. But looking at the current numbers, it looks unlikely that we will hit the sanctioned squadron strength even by 2040. This is by the admission of Indian Air Force itself. So that highlights the critical gaps in our defense preparedness. So with this, I complete all the big articles, all the detailed analysis articles. Now we move to the smaller articles, which are prelims oriented. On page number 6, we have an article referring to the PSLV-C55 mission of ISRO, which is all set to be launched tomorrow on the 22nd of April. All right. So there are some unique aspects about this mission. In this mission, it's a commercial mission essentially. ISRO is launching this for few commercial vendors, foreign vendors. Through this, Singapore's Teleos 2 satellite will be launched as the primary payload along with the Lumilite 4 as a co-passenger satellite. Both are foreign satellites being launched by ISRO for a cheaper cost. India is a reliable destination for launching these payloads into orbit. ISRO provides a cheap, reliable option, a cost-effective option. So it has emerged as a destination for launching such satellites into orbit. Along with these two commercial payloads, ISRO will be making use of the last stage of the mission, right? PSLV has the fourth and final stage called PS4, which will be employed for conducting scientific experiments after these satellites are deployed into orbit. Is that clear? The PSLV will first place the two satellites in orbit, which are commercial launches. After the satellite deployment is completed, the fourth and final stage, the PS4 stage, it will remain in orbit and it will conduct a series of scientific experiments. This is called PSLV Orbital Experimental Module. This is an ingenious innovation by ISRO to ensure that the rocket stages don't go waste. We will ensure that PS4 stage remains in orbit for a short period of time, for a few days, during which the 7 scientific experiments on this platform will be conducting scientific experiments. Is that clear? There are 7 separate scientific payloads on the orbital experimental module, which is the PS4 module of the PSLV rocket. It will remain in orbit and it will continue conducting scientific experiments, in orbit scientific experiments. All right, so this is how ISRO optimizes its minimal resources while delivering maximum benefits. Next, on page 6, we have an article referring to the sloth bear. Unfortunately, a sloth bear in Kerala has fallen into a well. While trying to capture the bear so that it can be safely released, it was fired with a dart. The forest officials, they fired a dart to ensure the sloth bear becomes unconscious so that it could be safely lifted out of the well. But as the bear fell unconscious, it has drowned unfortunately in the well, thus losing its life. So this unfortunate event highlights the risk of urbanization, habitat destruction, how it threatens these threatened endangered species of animals. The sloth bear is a very, very important species in the Indian ecosystem. The sloth bear is also called the Indian bear and it is native to the Indian subcontinent. Please note down this point, very, very important for your prelims. The sloth bear is also called the Indian bear. It's native to the Indian subcontinent and it mainly feeds on fruits, ants and termites. It's an omnivore. But it's facing a considerable threat. Its numbers have declined in the wild and it is listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. It's a vulnerable species, a threatened species according to IUCN. The biggest threat for sloth bear is habitat loss and degradation. Increasing deforestation, urbanization, industrial activity. It has put stress on our forest ecosystems, thus leading to habitat loss and habitat degradation. The same can be seen in Karnataka, which is a major habitat for the sloth bear. Large-scale habitat destruction has increased cases of man-animal conflict, where sloth bears enter into human habitations and quite often they lose their lives. So this is a very serious threat and the species is protected under Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act of India. Schedule 1 accords the highest degree of protection. All right? Hunting of these animals, of these species is completely prohibited. It's a criminal offense with a jail term. So if a species is listed under Schedule 1, it gives it the maximum legal protection. So sloth bears are protected under Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act. Now moving on to the 7th article from page 14, there are 2 articles related to SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We were already mentioning this in one of the previous articles. So here we have 2 developments. One, since India is currently holding the chair of SCO, India is going to host the next SCO summit at Goa in May 2023. In a few weeks, India will be playing host to the SCO countries. At Goa, the SCO summit is going to take place. This is the first time that India will be hosting the SCO summit in a physical format. All right. So as the summit is coming up, there are few ministerial meetings taking place. There was a ministerial meeting regarding disaster management. India's Home Minister Amit Shah right? He addressed the members of SCO on this meeting of disaster management and disaster resilience, because India's Home Ministry is responsible for disaster management. It's a nodal ministry. So Amit Shah has highlighted the need for pooling resources in the region to deal with disasters, to build disaster resilience. He spoke about India's efforts in scaling up disaster management in the last couple of decades. He has spoken about India's initiative, such as the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. It's an India-led global initiative to make infrastructure disaster resilient. It has 39 members today. We also provide for tsunami early warning in the Indian Ocean region through INCOIS, through the Indian National Center for Oceanic Information Services. After the 2004 tsunami, India set up a dedicated early warning system, right, that today covers almost the entire Indian Ocean. India today provides for tsunami early warning for almost all the Indian Ocean countries through the INCOIS, which is based out of Hyderabad. We have taken many measures through our Disaster Management Act of 2005, and the NDMA, the National Disaster Management Authority, has streamlined disaster management in India, and India has become a leader in disaster governance today. So based on this expertise, Home Minister Amit Shah has urged SCO members to work with each other to pool the resources to deal with disasters, to build disaster resilience. All right? Then Pakistan's foreign minister reportedly will attend the SCO summit. Despite the tensions prevalent between India and Pakistan, right? The ties have been affected since 2019 at least. In fact, since Uri attacks and the surgical strikes in 2016, since then India-Pakistan ties have been affected. We don't have any high-level engagement going on. But since it's a multilateral summit, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari is likely to visit India and attend the SCO summit. So these are two big developments being reported here. So please be familiar with some basic facts about SCO. Very important for your prelims. For example, it was established in 1996 as the Shanghai 5 group. Initially, it was formed by Russia, China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. These were the 5 countries from Eurasia which set up this group. SCO is a political, economic and military grouping, all right, representing the Eurasia region with focus on Central Asia. Later in 2001, Uzbekistan also became a member and it was renamed as SCO, also called the Shanghai Pact. It was established by signing the Shanghai Pact. Understood? So these were the initial members. And then in 2017, India and Pakistan were admitted as members who were observers until then. And in 2018, both India and Pakistan joined as full-time members of SCO. And recently in 2021, Iran was approved as the 9th member of SCO, and last year it has started the process of joining the SCO. This time, Iran will be participating for the first time as a full-time member of SCO. This important group has many observer countries as well, including Afghanistan, Belarus, Turkey, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, right? So a lot of countries are interested in the SCO, including Saudi Arabia and UAE. So this is all set to become one of the world's most important and largest groupings. It's a political grouping, economic grouping, and a defense security grouping as well. It focuses on counter-terrorism and all security-related issues. To tackle terrorism in Afghanistan-Pakistan belt and in Central Asia, there is a dedicated platform called RATS, Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure. It's a dedicated platform for counter-terrorism under SCO. SCO hosts military exercises as well between the member countries. India takes part in them. There is a disaster management exercise as well of the SCO countries. They focus on Central Asia to exploit the resources of Central Asia through better connectivity. This is another key focus. SCO is focused on stabilizing Afghanistan as well. All these are priority areas. It's focusing on improving cultural ties, tourism and trade. So India stands to gain by participating with SCO, and currently we hold the chair and India is going to host the summit this year. So that is why all these basic facts are very, very important. Coming to the 8th article from page 14, it's a small development, but please make a note of it. Under the Eat Right campaign, which we have discussed in the recent sessions, it's an initiative by Food Safety Standards Authority of India. Under the Eat Right campaign, 100 Eat Right food streets will be set up in 100 districts of the country. See, as you know, street food might be unhygienic, right? Safety, quality standards may not be met by street food vendors, but yet people love street food. So to promote healthy eating and to promote better hygienic food and nutritious food in street food, the FSSAI, along with the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, together will be working with state governments and local bodies to set up these Eat Right food streets in 100 districts of the country. The whole idea is to promote healthy eating, hygienic food, nutritious food in street food as well. So 100 food streets will be set up as model streets under the Eat Right campaign. All right? So that is what is being reported in this article. Coming to the last article from the same page, it's related to vaccine hesitancy and vaccine confidence. I hope you know that when it comes to vaccines, there are a lot of people who have hesitancy when it comes to taking vaccines, especially those who come from an orthodox mindset, a religious orthodox mindset, right? They fall prey for misinformation, superstition, etc. Right? There's a lot of misinformation surrounding vaccines, not just in India, but around the world. There is basically fake news campaigns, deliberate campaigns run by religious orthodox groups based on unscientific claims. They say that vaccines are a Western conspiracy to control people. It's a conspiracy to sterilize people. So a lot of such fake news and misinformation is floating around regarding vaccines. And when such theories float around in rural areas and amongst the illiterate population, they tend to believe them. So as people believe in such rumors and misinformation, vaccine hesitancy develops in the society. Even regarding its side effects. If the side effects are over-exaggerated, people might hesitate to take the vaccine. This is quite common in developing countries, in underdeveloped countries, and even in developed nations, especially amongst the religious orthodoxy, those towards the right-wing extremist sides, right? They tend to believe in these conspiracy theories and there is a hesitancy to receive vaccines. So this is affecting our fight against diseases. It's threatening the health of our children. That is why there is a global project to track vaccine hesitancy and instill vaccine confidence. It's called the Vaccine Confidence Project. All right? It was started in 2010 by Heidi Larson. It was her individual initiative, which today is backed by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. It functions like a non-government organization and it works closely with UNICEF and also the WHO to promote vaccine confidence around the world. All right? This project brings out a report on vaccine hesitancy. And according to the report, vaccine confidence has increased in India, especially with regard to children vaccines. But similarly, in other countries, in few African countries, in countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, in Nigeria, in Ethiopia, in these countries, vaccine hesitancy has increased, thus affecting vaccination of children, right? It has observed that, especially in Nigeria, there has been a constant effort to spread misinformation about polio vaccines. The same has been seen in Pakistan and Afghanistan as well. Rumors and false news being spread against vaccines. We have seen the same happening with COVID-19 vaccines as well. So this project brings out a report and it publishes an early warning system so that vaccine hesitancy can be tackled from the very beginning. It keeps track of rising vaccine hesitancy around the world. It provides an early warning to the governments, to WHO, to UNICEF, works with all of them to boost vaccine confidence. So UNICEF India has published UNICEF's global report, flagship report, The State of World Children 2023. This is a flagship report of UNICEF. This report makes note of the findings of Vaccine Confidence Project. And according to the report, confidence in India regarding children's vaccine has gone up. It's a good news. It's a positive development. It means people have more faith in children vaccines. It will increase the vaccine coverage, thus protecting our children from deadly diseases. But the same cannot be said with other countries in Africa and Asia where vaccine hesitancy has been increasing. These are some key findings of this report brought out by the Vaccine Confidence Project. And it's been published by the UNICEF. So these are important points for your prelims. And on this note, I conclude my session for today. Please take up the mains practice questions. Write your answers, post them in the answer writing portal. The link for that has been given in the description below. And don't forget to head to our Telegram channel, because as soon as the session ends, we have a quiz on all these topics. It will help you revise these topics again. So that is it from my side. I hope it was a good session. Do let me know how it went. I'll take a look at all your comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.